Good day. Welcome to Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com, produced by Sharc Creative and made possible by our good friends over at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric. Don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis. Also by Hightower Westchester, fiduciary advisors at Hightower. They manage your wealth to a fiduciary standard. And White Plains Hospital, special thanks to our heroes at White Plains for all they've done throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Here on our isolation therapy series, we are joined by Joe Russo. Joe Russo is Senior Vice President of Executive Protection at Manhattan-based P&M Protection USA, specializing in custom security services, investigations, and intelligence. Joe Russo, thank you for joining us here on Westchester Talk Radio. And all I can say is the world, as it keeps changing throughout 2020 into 2021, has changed much in the past few days. Everything going on in Washington, D.C., all the threats about the inauguration. We'll get into all of that. Give us a bit of a background on P&M and your background, too. How did you get involved?
Yeah, so hey, John, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Hard for me to even fathom that I've been, January 31st will be 17 years since I retired from the Secret Service and been with P&M that entire time. Was brought on board by our CEO and owner, Robert Tucker, Scarsdale resident, who was looking to start an executive protection division at that time. We were really predominantly a security guarding company. And we also had a small explosive detection canine division, which was also under me in special operations. And that's how I started there 17 years ago, coming up on 18 now. Now 17 years later, fast forward, I'm actually an executive vice president. We just recently changed our corporate name to T&M USA LLC from T&M Protection Resources, January 1st. We transferred over to T&M USA. I now oversee, as the executive vice president, both security consulting division and the executive protection division, which I started back in 2004, which is now, of course, our largest division. And we are also the largest provider of security in Israel. T&M Israel is the largest security provider over there in the state of Israel. So busy place. Hard to believe that I've been there for 17 years and have stayed there the entire time. But it's been a great journey. And, of course, right when I thought there might be a little light at the end of the tunnel, 2020 happened, and of course now with everything going on here. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I did 20 years in the Secret Service. My last 2 years, I was the special agent in charge of President Clinton's division up in Chappaqua. So when I had them in 02 to 04, Mrs. Clinton was actually the New York senator at the time. And President Clinton was only out of office for 2 years, so he was still very active. I was in 50 countries in the 2 years that I was there with him as his special agent in charge. And prior to that, I was in the New York field office. I spent 2 tours there. In between those 2 tours, I was on the Vice Presidential Protective Division in D.C., where I was serving Vice President Quayle up until the election of 92. And then I transferred over, obviously, to the Gore family and was with Vice President Gore and his family for 3.5 years. My first 9 years in the New York field office, mostly investigations, counterfeit money and others. And then when I got back, I was a supervisor in both the credit card fraud squad and eventually I ran the protection squad there, responsible for all protectees, Secret Service protectees visiting New York City. And unfortunately was there on 9/11. Our office was in 7 World Trade Center, which is the building that collapsed about 5 o'clock that night. So we lost the largest office in the Secret Service on that day. So that's basically it. And now I've been in the private sector for, like I said, 17 years.
How difficult has it been to provide security during the Trump administration, during Donald Trump's presidency?
You know, that is a great question because the mechanic certainly changed. You know, we have a lot of clients in the media world. So we support media across the board, all the different networks and media outlets. And probably about halfway through his term, his current term, which is about to come to an end, many of the media who were vilified at the events and rallies started feeling very threatened attending some of these things. So it got to the point where they almost refused to do it without having security there. So we went from providing, security, a small footprint at a few events here and there, to almost full-time work the entire 3 years, the past 3 years with them across the country. And so that's certainly it. And then, of course, we have had a lot of clients concerned about the safety of their companies and corporations and families and other things based on a lot of the risen threat and risk levels that we've seen over the last, couple of years, especially over the last few weeks, even more so. So it's changed a bit because of the clients that we have in those arenas. And then generally, everything else has pretty much remained the same, other than the fact that, a big part of our business was supporting our clients during international travel and, of course, domestic travel. And international travel has really decreased to zero. So we haven't really supported any of our clients on any overseas trips. And domestically, it certainly was scaled back. Many of them went to vacation homes and other areas outside of where they lived in New York, LA, Miami, other places. So we've been supporting them there. And then our security consulting division has certainly become very busy because we have now done and conducted security assessments at people's residences where they would not have even thought about it before, where they're spending a lot of time, and have taken advantage of office, conducting assessments of office because they're empty. So it's a good time for companies to, look down that path prior to their folks hopefully getting back to work.
Mm-hmm. How do you gauge a credible threat? What might be a real threat to you may not be to me, vice versa. Somebody may say, oh, he looked at me the wrong way. That's threatening.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do these days because there's so many ways to pose a threat. Like I told you the other day, when I was in the White House back in the 90s, there was, literally two ways to threaten the President of the United States. You would actually send a letter via mail. I'm sure most people don't even know what that is these days. Or you would call the White House switchboard. Now, with all the social media outlets, there's so many ways for people to go on there, express their opinions on things, which can get a bit risky. And most of the folks who are in that business of pushing that type of information know exactly where they can draw the line there. So federal authorities, private sector have to have a very large footprint in the intelligence and information gathering sections, and have the ability in-house to disseminate that to understand what they think might be a credible threat or risk. And it's very difficult to do because of all the groups and everything else we see. So, the Secret Service Intelligence Division now is probably 10 times the size of what it was when I was there, just so that they can handle, this massive amount of information coming in, monitor it, utilize it as a tool, and then be able to, as best they can, disseminate it and make decisions based on that information.
Mm-hmm. You look at social media, and what may be a threat may actually be someone just spouting off the top of their head because they're ticked off in the moment. And yet you look at something that might be innocent, looks to be innocent or innocuous, and then that could turn out to be a threat too. And that adds to the difficulty of what you have to do.
It certainly does. Our business intelligence division at T&M handles all of our social media monitoring, and for all of our clients who have a profile on social media, and even those who don't, because, you need to look at what people are saying about the companies they work for, the companies they own. Certainly personally, if they're vocal on the internet, which we try to advise our clients not to be, whether they're taking a political position, a social position, people are going to see that. And as you know, people are going to have their opinions about that. So that's where it really starts. So we try to convince our clients, even though it's difficult for them because they're in the business of public relations a lot of times, to minimize their postings on social media and have their family do the same. But nevertheless, it's going to be out there. The information is out there, and we have to look at that.
Westchester Talk Radio, Isolation Therapy. I'm John Marino, joined by Joe Russo, Executive Vice President at Manhattan-based T&M USA. Joe, you talked about the changes through the years in private security and what the concerns are now, especially during the ongoing pandemic. You talked about working with the Clintons, working with the Trump presidency. Now, all of a sudden, down in Washington, D.C., with Joe Biden ready to take office, so much has changed in the past week with the attack on the Capitol. What kind of a position are you and your people in right now? What do you see happening within the next few days down in D.C., and how do we protect the incoming president? And not only that, the 50 state capitals across this country that seemingly are under threat now, too.
Yeah, I mean, again, great question. So I think everybody now is really aware of what's happening because of what we saw at the Capitol, obviously, insurrection against our country, our nation, and our freedom, which was very difficult, especially for me to watch and others who spent a lot of time in Washington. I was at the Capitol all the time with Vice President Gore, on a vote break or whatever. So very difficult to watch that. And now to see that a lot of the folks there were former military and a lot of active military and active law enforcement, former law enforcement. So, it hits a lot closer to home for people like me to see that and then know that there's people from my background who are involved in that. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think now most people are paying much more attention, as we talked about on the social media front, on these groups. The FBI and the other federal agencies always have a great handle on watching some of the higher profile groups like the Proud Boys or white supremacist groups and others. But now everybody really has their eye on it because, that's where they organize. They organize online on these different sites, and they are very organized. Don't be fooled that they aren't. And they're very well financed. We know that as well. And when they show up in a place like Washington, D.C., it's not just to go down there and walk around with 1,000 people. They actually have a plan, and they had a plan, last week. So I think what we're looking for, everybody's bracing to see exactly what's going to happen. Obviously in Washington, D.C., it's going to be very difficult for any group to mobilize down there. The streets have already shut down. The perimeter has been pushed way out. They have permanent steel fencing. I think 20,000 National Guards will be deployed there. So it's going to be a very hard target during the inauguration, and no one will get anywhere near there. But as you mentioned, people are more concerned about the softer targets, such as state capitals and other places where security might be more or less I should say than it's going to be required. Although now, seeing what happened, I think most people are erring on the side of being much more cautious and really rolling out all their assets and manpower for the next few weeks. I'm concerned about some of the individual people, the senators and congressmen and women who may not have all this security when they're leaving the Capitol or when they're home and other places. So I'm sure, and I know for a fact that they've been reaching out to companies like ours and others to support them for at least a time being. But all in all, it's a sad state that we've come to this. And I think everybody's just bracing to see exactly what's going to occur. I don't think there'll be anything major happening in D.C. on and around Inauguration Day, but I think we're more concerned about some of the more softer targets around the country.
This heightened sense of security, we look at Inauguration Day, how far past the inauguration do we need to be as vigilant as we are right now? Understanding that maybe we can't be this vigilant every day in a free society, but we do have to keep this up for a while. How long do we need to do this for?
Again, a great question. I don't think that question's answered. I think we're going to have to wait to see over the next week or so exactly what occurs. Pick up a lot of the information and intelligence that the FBI has been sharing with the other agencies, stuff that we're seeing and other companies like us are seeing. And I think it's going to be a day-by-day decision-making process until we figure it out. I think one thing we all learned last week was there's a lot of angry people in this country, and that's not going to end anytime soon with Joe Biden and his administration in there. Obviously, the Secret Service is on extreme heightened alert, and they will be for a long time. Not that they aren't all the time with the president, but they certainly will have to be very concerned about a lot of domestic groups where that's not always been the case.
Mm-hmm. Now, in D.C. and in these state capitals around the country, we'll have all these people congregating, supposedly. You talked about monitoring online. We look at something like Section 230, which is considered social media protection. And there's the drive now to repeal or adjust Section 230. Without maybe going that far, or we look at Twitter, we look at Instagram, taking Donald Trump off of what they do, Facebook, etc. Is there a way to really cut into all this social media and all these groups that communicate together online, a way to cut them off too and still be a free country? Still be a freedom of speech country as we are?
Again, great question. I'm not really the one to answer that, but I will say that it certainly has been effective in limiting the outlets to some of these people who are trying to organize on there. And also, for the president himself, who I think we all agree probably overdid it a bit on Twitter. So I think it's been a lot quieter because of that. But there's many, many other sites, as we all know, on the dark web and other places where they can congregate and do their thing. It's a fine line with free speech, and exactly what people can and will say and how they actually can say it. So I think it's something that, a lot of people are now thinking about, especially the folks who own and run these platforms.
Mm-hmm. You talk about it being quieter now. Does that give you concern, it being quieter now, where something can be organized kind of in a roundabout way instead of in our faces like it has been?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, these groups are very aware that people are monitoring their movements online. So, now I think even now or over the last few years, they've started to understand that, whatever they put out there can be obtained by the federal government. So, they're probably organizing as much as they can there, but then they're still doing stuff more covertly, especially if there's going to be plans with very bad intention. I don't think they're going to be putting it out there on social media. Mm-hmm. So, unless they want to have an impact like they do now, saying that they're going to, storm the capitals and they're going to be armed and all the other things. So we'll have to wait to see what happens. Look, I'm concerned about law enforcement. I'm concerned about our military because these folks, a lot of them are former military and former law enforcement. We all know the issue with gun control in the United States and lack thereof, and how many of these states have open carry policies and people are allowed to walk around with, shoulder weapons and concealed weapons. Mm-hmm. So it's certainly a concern for everybody. And now that looks like they're more empowered to go out and do this and really have bought into, the election fraud and other stuff that's being put out. I think everybody's very concerned.
Mm-hmm. Joined by Joe Russo here on Westchester Talk Radio. Joe Russo is Executive Vice President at Manhattan-based of T&M USA. Now, besides the situation in Washington, D.C., we talk cybersecurity, which is obviously something that has grown into a massive concern with everything we see going on in this country and around the world, where we can hack into each other any place we like at any time. How involved is T&M with cybersecurity protection nowadays?
Sure. But there's no security company, full service security company that doesn't have some type of arm of cybersecurity. We've had that for a long time. It is so important, besides what we've talked about, which also falls under cyber a lot of the times, which is the social media stuff. Cybersecurity breaches on individuals, corporations, our government by foreign actors is evident and has been played out in the media. We've seen it, so it's extremely important. An attack on our country through cyber, we've seen how effective that can be, more so than boots on the ground a lot of times. And now we've just been reading recently about cryptocurrency and how that's being transferred and how groups are possibly being funded by that from overseas actors. So huge piece of work we have in cyber. We always have, but even more so now because people are becoming a lot more concerned about securing their information, because informational security is obviously just as important to most of our clients and companies as their personal safety.
Does the average person walking the street understand this, that cybersecurity is just as important as a military or the day-to-day police security in their communities?
Probably not. I don't think too many people are thinking about it. Everybody's got their head in their phone and they're doing their thing, but any of that and all of that information can certainly be compromised.
Mm-hmm. And yet you see on your computer every day, Norton blocked so-and-so from trying to get into you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would think this would raise the level of concern amongst the average person when it comes to their own cybersecurity. And yet it seems like that doesn't happen, that we wait for a major hack and we hear about it and we say, oh, they could really do that. And then we have to deal with it at that point because whatever company or governmental agency that had been hacked that we hear about could have been you hacked in there too.
Oh, absolutely. Our information is all over the place, right? In government agencies and corporations and banks and other places. So those institutions have to really be concerned about cyber, and they are, and they try to stay ahead of it. But like anything else, the criminal seems to always be a step ahead. And if they have very bad intentions and they have the capability and they're well funded and they're able to recruit the talent that can conduct these breaches, then it'll happen.
Mm-hmm. Vaccination distribution now is something that we have to have, obviously, T&M involved with that, getting our vaccines distributed around the country safely and into people's arms. How difficult is this to work with the vaccination distribution nationwide now?
It's interesting. We tried to stay out ahead of that as well and pivot when we knew that this was going to happen. A couple of those vaccinations and the pharmaceutical companies are clients of ours. So what we've done and what other security companies I'm sure have done is on the local level have assisted with the security of the vaccination once the military got it to its final destinations. Now the hospitals and clinics are responsible to get that to their local facilities so that they can administer the vaccine to the public. So we're assisting with the secure transport of the vaccinations and the vaccines, and we're also at the vaccination sites to make sure that the queued up lines in some places where they're very long, stay in order, and just try to help with the security and the facilitation of the vaccination.
Mm-hmm. And you have to make sure, I guess, that in every state that you work, that the vaccines are distributed in a certain way as mandated by that state, correct? For example, New York State has pretty stringent vaccination, inoculation rules that we have to follow. I guess you have to make sure that that's all in line too.
Yeah, most of the facilities and the medical facilities have to be concerned about that. So they know what that is, and they know exactly what they're required to do, is everything from refrigeration to transport. So we don't really get involved in that piece of it. They just tell us, when and where, and we make sure that when and where is very secure.
Mm-hmm. T&M also involved with investigative services. How much of the part of the business is that?
Yeah, listen, in New York, our headquarters in New York at Park Avenue, probably about 50% of our business overall is investigations, and that's really grown. And we're in, several different areas of investigation, whether it be medical fraud or corporate investigation, private investigation. So we have a lot of attorneys on board. Mike Mansfield, the executive vice president of that division, my counterpart at T&M, is a former attorney, prosecuting attorney from Queens. He was also the commissioner of business integrity of New York City, appointed by the mayor. And so Mike's got tremendous experience and a great team underneath him. And that also oversees all of our business intelligence, which is what we talked about before, which is the social media monitoring, backgrounding, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as, besides what's going on in D.C. right now, what do you see as the biggest security threat to us as a nation and locally here in the tri-state area too?
Well, I think right now it's obviously the imminent danger is, these right-wing groups and where they're going to fall, and what type of action they're going to take besides the actions that they're threatening to take, and to see how big of a movement that could be. I mean, obviously everybody woke up last week, but now we have to wait to see how that's going to play out. And I think I'm hoping that over the next few months that we can try to get a little rest, and maybe people will calm down a bit politically. And hopefully we get our arms around, the coronavirus and COVID and get these vaccinations out there, which is really what we need to be focusing on. And, stop these super spreaders, people aren't really talking about what happened in Washington last week, but I'm sure you didn't see a lot of masks on people, and they were in very close quarters. So, something like that could set us back months when it comes to the COVID battle. So, we'll have to wait and see, but yeah, it's unprecedented times. I've never seen anything like this in all the years that I've been in security, and I have been in security for many years. And so it's more of a day-to-day thing, and watching the wire to see where we are with the physical threats, and then hopefully we can get our arms around the COVID issue, and maybe by mid to end of 2021 we have a handle on it.
Now, with all the work T&M does around the tri-state area, you have a number of local Westchester clients, too, that you help and assist.
Sure. Many of our clients who live and work around Manhattan have residences in Westchester, up in the Scarsdale, Bedford, Chappaqua areas. Some of the companies that sit up and purchase and others are our clients, some of the big companies up there in White Plains. So we have a big footprint up here. My CEO is on the board at White Plains Hospital. I'm a Westchester guy. I was a New Rochelle police officer before I was a Secret Service agent. So we have a big footprint in Westchester. We utilize a lot of off-duty and retired police and law enforcement from the area, from all the small departments, big departments all over. So a big part of our workforce that actually do the work for us in the field, which is, the biggest part of TNM, are all active former law enforcement from the Westchester area.
Mm-hmm. You read my mind on my next question. I was going to ask you, who do you look to hire at TNM? Or for somebody else who may not have a law enforcement background but might like to get involved, do you look to certain people from certain areas and disciplines and backgrounds?
We do. We're very strict at who we bring on board at TNM. A lot of it is word of mouth, always has been. In the New York area alone, we have a couple of hundred former active law enforcement that are part-time or full-time working for us. And most of those folks have come to us through others who work for us. That's what we look for. We look for good talent, people who are interested, people who are engaged, and who have passion to do the work. We don't want to be just putting people out there and not, giving them the proper instruction or guidance or training. We make sure we have all that. And so in the field, it's basically active former police from the area in both the 5 boroughs in New York, out in Long Island, up here in Westchester, in Connecticut, New Jersey. We're licensed in all those states. We also have a office in Washington, D.C., run by a former colleague, Secret Service colleague of mine, John Pizzuto, who handles that whole area. So he's got Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. And we're also set up out in Los Angeles. John Marino is our managing director out there. So all those places, we look for local law enforcement talent. On the investigative side, obviously Mike's group are a lot of attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, and he has a lot of folks who come from the investigative world of law enforcement.
Bottom line, to bring all this together, you have to be pretty adept and flexible.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's part of being in this business. You got to be adept and flexible. And it's, a lot of it, unfortunately, is reactionary. We'd like to be proactive as much as we can, but in this business, it's reacting all the time to things that happen, obviously, like we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Joe Russo, Executive Vice President at T&M USA, based in Manhattan. Joe, can you give us some contact information for T&M for anyone thinking about upping their security, especially now?
Sure. So you can go to our website, TM USA LLC. You'll see our website there. All of our divisions are on there, all of our capabilities, all of our people, upper management. You'll get a great feeling. And for me, it's just jrusso at tmusallc.com.
All right, Joe Russo, T&M USA. Thank you. Much appreciated. And especially during these COVID times, stay safe, and these uncertain times with everything you and all of your colleagues do, without a doubt, stay safe, especially down in D.C. and around state capitals across the country next week.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and stay safe and healthy.
Yes, you too. Hope we get to talk again soon. Joe Russo, T&M USA here. Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Sharc Creative. I'm John Marino, and we are made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities right through April of this year, 2021. Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. Park Sterling Realty in Bronxville, and Michael Labriola Landscape Design and Construction in Armonk. Catch all of our Westchester, Fairfield County, Putnam and Dutchess Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.